Support for I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere comes from MX Publishing, with the largest catalog of new Sherlock Holmes books in the world. New novels, biographies, graphic novels, and short story collections about Sherlock Holmes. Find them at mxpublishing.com.
And by the Wessex Press, the premier publisher of books about Sherlock Holmes and his world. Find them online at wessexpress.com.
And from listeners like you, who support us through Patreon. Bonus material, thank you gifts, and more await at patreon.com/I Hear of Sherlock. I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, episode 270, Crime Reads with Olivia Rutigliano.
I hear of Sherlock everywhere since you became astronomer.
In a world where it's always 1895, it's I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, a podcast for devotees of Mr. Sherlock Holmes, the world's first unofficial consulting detective.
I've heard of you before. You're Holmes the meddler, Holmes the busybody, Holmes the Scotland Yard Jack in office.
The game's afoot as we interview authors, editors, creators, and other prominent Sherlockians on various aspects of the great detective in popular culture.
As we go to press, sensational developments have been reported.
So join your hosts, Scott Monty and Bert Wolder, as they talk about what's new in the world of Sherlock Holmes.
You couldn't have come at a better time!
Hello and welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast for Sherlock Holmes devotees where it's always 1895. I'm Scott Monty.
I'm Bert Wolder.
And Bert, are you all read up on crime?
Oh, but I'm up to my eyeballs in crime. Yeah, I somehow, just to keep my hand in, I like to get up about an hour earlier before I normally get up and steal something off my bookshelves, and then spend the rest of the morning trying to figure out who done it and what's missing.
Oh, that's perfect. Well, we will be talking whodunit with Olivia Rutigliano from CrimeReads in just a moment. It's a great discussion, not only of Sherlock Holmes, but of crime fiction in general, and as it spills over into film and television. Really nice intersection there. We think it's a discussion that everyone should want to listen to. And after the episode is over, we get into the canonical couplet quiz, where we announce the winner from the last episode, and we have a chance for you to win an item from the iHose vaults here. So make sure you stay tuned for that, because everybody is eligible to participate. It's fairly easy, so it's your chance to win something from us. And after that, we also talk about some items of Sherlockian news. We heard from some of our listeners recently that they missed hearing when we covered some of the events and goings-on in the world of Sherlock Holmes, so we thought we'd bring that back to a certain degree. If that resonates with you, make sure you let us know. In the meantime, this episode can be found at ihose.co/ihose270, all lowercase. That'll take you directly to our website. We encourage you to sign up there for email updates and to support us on Patreon if you are able to. You'll get outtakes and excerpts and extra content, as well as be able to listen to the show ad-free. And recently, Patreon mentioned that they are making patron-only shows available through Spotify. So if you are a Spotify user, make sure you subscribe to us there, and you can get your Patreon content all in one place on Spotify. Check us out and let us know. Olivia Rutigliano writes about movies and literature and their histories. Within these subjects, her interest focuses on form, aesthetics, detectives, heists, capitalism, class, labor, mass media, children's entertainment, theater, spectacle, and gender from the 19th century through today. Olivia is the Associate Editor of LitHub's CrimeReads vertical and Senior Film Writer at LitHub, where she has worked since July of 2019. She's also a contributing editor at Bright Wall Dark Room. She writes long and short form articles for all of these publications on film, literature, and culture. Her other essays have been published online in Vanity Fair, Vulture, Lapham's Quarterly, Public Books, The Baffler, the Los Angeles Review of Books, Politics Letters, and Truly Adventurous, among other places. She's had essays republished and featured in long form, Long Reads, The Millions, Robert Cottrell's The Browser, Pocket, and in translation. She's based in New York City, where she's a PhD candidate and the Marion E. Ponsford Fellow in the Departments of English and Comparative Literature and Theater at Columbia University. There, she specializes in 19th and early 20th century literature and entertainment. Olivia Rutigliano, welcome to I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. We're thrilled that you could be here, and we're thrilled that we got to meet you face-to-face in January. And I don't think we got to chat about it then, but as long as we're on the subject, why don't we cover it now? How did you first encounter Sherlock Holmes?
Oh my goodness. I think I first encountered Sherlock Holmes from a Wishbone episode on PBS, on TV when I was a kid. I am a great dog lover and have always been a great book lover, and I think discovering that TV show did a lot for me. But there was a very charming Sherlock Holmes episode. It was the Hound of the Baskervilles themed. There's a neighborhood dog that's terrorizing the block where Wishbone and his humans live. And it reminds Wishbone of a book. It reminds him of the Hound of the Baskervilles, and so he takes us into the narrative, and he dons the deerstalker cap and cloak, and he becomes our Sherlock Holmes with a human Watson in the retelling of the Hound of the Baskervilles for kids. I think that was my first encounter with Sherlock Holmes. But I've always been interested in detectives, so after that it was sort of Nancy Drew and Boxcar Children and what have you, until I stumbled upon a copy of The Hound of the Baskervilles in my elementary school library and brought it home, read it, and have been addicted ever since.
That's a great story.
It is a great story, yeah. I don't know. Have we ever heard anyone whose first encounter was with Wishbone? I think that might be.
I think that's first.
A new one. Yeah, that's great. That's great. So what do you think about when you, and the problem with interviews, of course, is people ask you questions about things you never think about. But what if you were to think about your own engagement with mysteries? What is all that about? You know, why even at that early age did you find things like Nancy Drew and Wishbone and detectives so interesting?
That's such a good question. I don't know that I have an articulate answer. The first thing that pops to mind is that I've always loved detectives. I can't put a finger on what it was that first drew me to that genre. I know that I loved so many movies when I watched them as a kid, and a movie that I watched that was particularly significant to me, and that perhaps I should have even mentioned when I answering your previous question, was The Great Mouse Detective, Basil of Baker Street. I wonder if that may have planted a seed. I watched it at a very young age. I was so scared of Ratigan, Vincent Price's rat Moriarty villain, that I actually couldn't watch it as a child regularly. I saw it once, it scared the dickens out of me, and then I came back to it when I was like 13 or 14, and it was fine. So I don't think that necessarily drew me to Sherlock Holmes, but perhaps it instilled some sort of curiosity about the mystery genre. But as early as I can remember, I was grabbing those paperbacks, those yellow-backed Nancy Drew books, and Cam Jansen, and if something had a mystery in it, I was automatically excited. I remember a friend of mine in second grade was reading a book called that had the phrase Smuggler's Cove in the title, and I was like, I don't know why, but I have to know about this. I think there was something very exciting about being a figure whose main job is the pursuit of knowledge, but it has a direct and immediate impact on society in a positive way when that knowledge is illuminated. And it serves a protective function. It serves, some sort of epistemological, metaphysical question answering, but it principally has a protective function. It helps people. And so it's a way that knowledge, I think, can be most practical. At least it seems that's the reputation. Every single show I watch ends up becoming a mystery show, I think, because the pull of knowledge is so strong for the characters, and that's the genre with which experimentation and investigation is most closely associated.
How was there anything else you read that scared you to death? I mean, when did you start reading through Sherlock Holmes and get to the speckled band, for example?
I think I read The Speckled Band when I was in high school, so I was fine. I was totally fine with that by the time it got there. But if I had read The Sussex Vampire as a kid, I would have been terrified, probably. I don't know. I was very choosy about the kind of books that I would read. I wanted to read everything, and then when I would encounter something that was too scary, immediately I would put it away. So I think I self-selected for such a long period of time that I kept myself away from stuff that was too scary. I distinctly remember loving Chris Van Allsburg picture books, like The Polar Express or The Stranger or The Wreck of the Zephyr or Jumanji. Books where there's some sort of supernatural possible explanation for the events that are occurring, or it may all be a dream, some sort of Wizard of Oz-esque framework that might have not necessarily scared me, but intrigued me enough that I wanted to read books where there's an unexplained event and then that event is worked through and there's a rational answer. But it was always important for me to read or watch things that had a rational answer as the ending. I would never wanted anything to be open-ended. When I watched Scooby-Doo as a child, I really liked watching the old ones, the 69 to 70 original Scooby-Doo episodes, because it was always basically a real estate scam, and that was very understandable. It was a human problem. But later on, the Hanna-Barbera and Warner Brothers or whatever grabbed Scooby-Doo and turned it into a direct-to-video series. There were Scooby-Doo episodes like The Reluctant Werewolf or whatever, where there was actually a supernatural problem. And even though it seemed like the mystery was solved at the end, then like the camera would pan and a Sasquatch would come out from behind the tree, or the Loch Ness Monster would, pop out of the lake. Or so there would be, some sort of like acceptable logical explanation, but there would still be a lurking supernatural problem, and that was just not okay.
Yeah,
that was not okay. Indeed, Rutrow, indeed.
They would have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for those meddling kids. Well, I mean, this is fascinating, the depth of not only your knowledge, but your interest here. Tell us a little bit about your education when you decided you wanted to pursue the path as a writer. What did you study, and how did this interest in crime fiction and the occult and all the rest come into play?
Sure. Thank you for asking such a lovely question that I will once again take us to my childhood for answering. I've always wanted to be a writer. Always. That was the thing I said I wanted to be when, friends of my parents or parents of my friends would ask me what I wanted to be. I always wanted to be a writer. I wanted to be a writer and illustrator for a long period of time. I am at an amateur status now, but I've always been very determined to hone my artistic abilities or lack of abilities. I wanted since the second grade to have a PhD. There was a doctor. A principal or official in my school who had a doctorate, and I didn't understand why we called them doctor when they weren't, checking my tonsils or taking my temperature. And my mom explained to me that there are different kinds of doctors, and that the doctor in my school is a doctor of words. That's what she has studied. She's a doctor of words, and I was like, I have to have that. So. I think from a very early age, my path was set. There was no doubt that I was going to be a writer. There was no doubt that I wanted to have a PhD as part of that. So that's the career level of that question. But I think all of the interests took hold in very slow ways. I think even though I was always a sucker for detective fiction and good mysteries, and particularly whodunits and golden age things, and I sort of erred away from too scary things or true crime or things like that. I think in college, my interests in mystery fiction were given like enough of a legitimization that I was able to feel like it could be something I could do, and it had always just been a hobby of mine. And even though I was very lucky that my parents and family encouraged me and wanted to support me being a writer, and I think I never assumed that I would be able to write a doctoral dissertation about detectives or pursue that as my main job. And I think in college, when I started taking classes in Victorian literature in particular, I was like, oh yeah, I can make this work. I can make this work, no problem. There's a lot of material. All of these mystery novels that we're reading have such interesting frameworks and questions about society and our relationship to truth and facts and fakery and scams. And there's so much here that can be applied to modern society that I'm sure someone will let me write a dissertation about it. And someone did.
Now, you're working on another PhD, aren't you? At least according to your website?
Yes, so I'm working on that PhD in Victorian literature. So I have been so consistent my whole life. My dissertation is specifically about Victorian detectives and the rise of the Victorian detective character as a performative figure as opposed to a sinister surveillance-focused figure. A lot of 20th century scholarship has looked at the detective as a figure who represented the increasing authority of the Victorian state, that there were going to be spies in the crowds, turning on their fellow neighbors, turning them into the police, narking on them, etc. There was this big uproar about that kind of thing, and scholars have long read detective fiction from that era as trying to mediate that. But I ask in my dissertation, how can the detective be a sinister figure who's spying on the populace of London on behalf of the Victorian state, unbeknownst to them, when like every 5 seconds the detective rips off a disguise and is like, it's me, the detective. There seemed to be some sort of contradiction there. So my dissertation is about how the detective characters absorb Victorian performance and theatrical conventions in a way that complicates their relationship to surveillance.
Wow, that's fascinating.
Yeah.
But you're also
so kind of you.
No, it really is interesting. You're also, though, heavily involved in theater. I know that you've done a short film and things, but also in theater. So what's your thinking about plays, about some of the more popular mystery plays and things like that? And really, what I really want to ask you, forget about that question. What I really want to ask you is, have you written anything like plays in your own fiction and thought up your own characters? And because you've got this strong academic streak, but I'm wondering if somewhere there's an Olivia Rutigliano pseudonym and you're actually the author of, some great series of detective stories or plays.
Thank you. I hope that in the future that might be the case. I've been very lucky in my life that I've been able to pursue creative things as well as research my interests, and I will be defending my dissertation actually like in a month and a half or somewhere around September 1st, or so from September to October. So after that, we'll hope that I will have an announcement about a book project, which is not nonfiction. So hopefully, I know I'm saying this on a podcast, so like people are hearing about it, but I talk about this all the time. So hopefully this isn't me jinxing anything or
No one listens to this anyway, so no worries.
And Olivia, the nice part is we're not going to tell anybody.
That's right. You're not going to tell anybody. I'm telling everybody. No, I hope that might happen. I think that the world we live in terms of, no, I'm going to rephrase that. I think that in today's world, there's such a perceived silo around academia, and I think academia is partially responsible for that. I think some of the greatest writers and most creative thinkers I've ever met have gone and pursued research PhDs and only pursued their love of making texts or acting or doing whatever later in life. And I wish it were more mainstream to see those two fields intertwined. I think it's sort of difficult to make it as a popular writer if you have an academic background, because the assumption is that you're so specialized, or that your work or even the way you phrase things might be inaccessible to people who don't have advanced degrees or are not in that specific community. I think there's a similar assumption in academia about people who are interested in doing public-facing popular writing and not being specialized enough. And I think those are huge problems, and I think more academics need to be out there doing creative things and vice versa. And I hope that I am able to continue doing this. The other thing that I've always loved, besides detectives and books and I guess dogs, since I brought up Wishbone, has been movies. And although I've always wanted to be a writer, I've hoped that as a writer I would be able to do lots of different kinds of writing, from research-based texts to personal or more creative essay writing, to film criticism, to novels, to screenplays, to even maybe plays. And I've been very lucky that my film background so far has led me to my other job at the magazine where I work, which is called Literary Hub, where I am the associate editor of its vertical CrimeReads. I'm also the film critic for the publication on the whole. And that's been wonderful. But I also have a background making short films. I was an English and film major in college, and I hope to continue to be involved as certain projects develop, but I hope to continue to be involved in interpreting stories for the screen. I think if you're a person who's interested in, storytelling of any kind, which I feel most people who gravitate to academia and popular writing are, no matter the specific branch, I think there should be fewer limits in the type of work you can do or the kind of things you can make. So I'm hopeful that I will be able to continue pursuing all of these loves in tandem and have those things be in conversation with one another.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's such a great representation of that crossover on CrimeReads. I want to talk to you about that after the break. But before we do go to break, I just wanted to pause on one thing. As you were mentioning this reluctance of the crossover from academia to popular culture and back again, where do you think the resistance lies? Is it that academia is too stuffy and too rigid? Is it that the public doesn't know enough about the academic side to want to be able to cross over? And in conjunction with that, why do you think Conan Doyle, and in particular the Sherlock Holmes stories, aren't taken more seriously in the academic world?
I have a lot of thoughts about this. The perceived resistance, I think, does take place on both sides. I think, however, academia is in a unique kind of reckoning point right now. Academic jobs are becoming few and far between because of decisions being made in the universities on the whole. STEM is being pushed and humanities programs are being cut. There are fewer and fewer jobs as there are more and more extremely qualified people with PhDs looking for them. I've heard that if you do, complete your graduate studies and you get your PhD and then you choose to go into another field, you become an intimidating candidate. It looks like you're overqualified if you're trying to switch into another field. But no matter what, I think all of these disciplines and various echelons or places or jobs even need to sort of relax, because I think if you pursue academic research, what that shows is that you're passionate about a subject and that you know a lot about it, and you want to be able to communicate that subject, because presumably if you've gone into academia, even as a graduate student, you've had to teach and write, and there's some sort of public-facing stuff that you've already done. The job of the good professor, the job of the academic, is ultimately to be able to juggle both worlds, speaking to a bunch of specialists and then also making things accessible. And there are, I think, anxieties within academia about allowing people to do too much fun stuff. I think no matter what you study, if you study it deeply and you study it well and you're able to illuminate things, modern and historical points, or unearth things that no one's ever thought about in that specific way before, I think that's all noble work. And I have been aware that in academia, certain things that are considered too genre, including the Sherlock Holmes stories, aren't taken as seriously. I will say that the Sherlock Holmes stories are definitely taken way more seriously than something else like, 20th century speculative fiction or something like that. Because I think every Victorianist actually secretly wants to talk, write, and teach about Sherlock Holmes. And Sherlock Holmes is a draw for students because everyone likes Sherlock Holmes. The enduring popularity of countless Sherlock Holmes reboots reminds us of this constantly. I've never been in a Victorian literature class that did not have a Conan Doyle story on the syllabus, survey or not. It's more of an text than I think a lot of people realize. And I think the more universities or teachers or academics present history and literature as being not... I think it's important for teachers and universities and professors in the academic community to represent that good literature does not mean that literature can't be fun also, and that it can't be popular. I think the idea that something can't be good and be popular is a really problematic distinction that exists at every level of creativity and industry. Like the Barbie movie, for example, that has been, recently undercut with a lot of criticism for its highbrow feminism and clever metaphorical messaging and complicated themes, while being backed by a large toy corporation and, in fact, perhaps advertising on behalf of that toy. So I think the idea that there has to be a binary between these things is complete nonsense and is a big fallacy that's guided too much. So what I would say about how to bridge this divide is that more academics should feel that their responsibility is to publish in places that people will actually read. It's really frustrating for academics too. You're writing a dissertation that maybe 7 to 10 people will read immediately after you've written it, and then you have to keep it locked away until you can turn it into an academic book, and not a whole lot of people will read that either. After you've done your magnum opus, you've completed your life's work, that's so frustrating. I think so many academics really want to show the world the awesome stuff that they've learned, and I hope there's more encouragement on the institutional front to let those students and teachers take those chances and publish in those places. And as for editors and publishers of magazines and other more mainstream things, just because someone has academic credentials does not mean that what they're talking about is going to be boring. In fact, it means that they know a lot about their subject matter and they can probably make it interesting.
Excellent. Well, that is a profound answer, and I think there's a lot of insight there. Let's continue with these insights just after this quick break from our sponsor. Stay tuned.
The Sherlock Holmes Review is back with articles on Sherlockian film and television, classic canonical scholarship, detective stories, illustrators, collecting, and more. In the latest annual, Curtis Armstrong tells how his love of Sherlock Holmes and acting first came together, how he starred in his first radio series, The Baker Street Theater, while he was still in high school, his encounter with Sherlock Holmes, Hugh Laurie and Lin-Manuel Miranda when he featured in the TV series House. How Sherlock Holmes crossed into his character in the WB series Supernatural, and his role as Inspector Gregson in the audible drama Moriarty, The Devil's Game. The Sherlock Holmes Review is back, combining great design with great writing, welcoming fans of every age and attitude. Get the latest issue, the 2022 annual, at wessexpress.com today.
Okay, we're back talking with Olivia Rutigliano from CrimeReads and Literary Hub, PhD candidate in Victorian detective. Well, I'm gonna mash it here. Why don't you tell me what the what the PhD is specifically in, Olivia?
I am in the English department at Columbia, but within a sub-department of that focuses in theater and performance also. So my dissertation is on Victorian Entertainment.
Excellent. Well, and this is perfect because, we hear and I hear of Sherlock everywhere, have always billed ourselves as sitting at the intersection of Sherlock Holmes and popular culture. And I think what CrimeReads has done, and Olivia, particularly on your beat, is you've kind of captured this connection between detectives that we see on the screen, big and small, and detectives that we read on the page. So talk to us a little bit about how CrimeReads came about as a branch of Literary Hub and how your role evolved.
Yes, sure. CrimeReads is a wonderful place. It's a vertical an offshoot of the website Literary Hub, which is an online literary arts and culture magazine that publishes online and has new material every single day. It's a daily website. Slightly before, I've been at CrimeReads and LitHub for 4 years. I started working for LitHub when I started working at CrimeReads, so there's been no one without the other for me. But CrimeReads was started, I believe, a year prior to when I joined, because Literary Hub, as wonderful as it was spreading itself across so many different genres. And it became clear to the LitHub employee who is now the editor-in-chief of CrimeReads, my boss, Dwyer Murphy, that there was such an opportunity to devote a section of the website to crime, because crime readers are more consistent and even faithful to that genre, I think, than any other readership of a specific genre is. And it didn't make as much sense to have the crime books scattered throughout the website. Collating the discussions about them seemed to be a really great way to bring the readers and fans of those genres to content about those books and those genres more directly. And so it was established as a home of these things, for these themes and genres. And I think CrimeReads is successful because crime fiction is so unbelievably successful. And once again, when someone likes crime fiction, it's typically not a one-off. If you like detectives, you're not just going to like one detective. Same with, if you like mysteries, it's probably more about the genre than the specific details of the book you're looking at. And so our hope is to bring people to new books and new movies and TV shows that'll allow them to whet their appetites in these specific genres, but also introduce them to conversations and discussions about these popular texts and also more obscure texts that'll allow them to continue learning and appreciating the thing that they already do. So it's basically just LitHub in a slightly more miniature, genre-focused form.
Wait, is this the only vertical within LitHub?
LitHub has two verticals. One is completely different, though. One is called Bookmarks, and it is more like, it's a review aggregator. It's like Rotten Tomatoes, but for books. So if you are in the bookstore and you are picking up the new novel by, Ann Patchett or Ian McEwan or Megan Abbott, and you want to know if it's good, you can go to Bookmarks. It's available online at bookmarks.reviews. You can type that in and click the book, and you can have presented to you selections from all of the reviews that have come out about it. There's like a little little meter like on Rotten Tomatoes, so you can see what the overall reception is of that book and know if it's something that you'd be interested in. And but that's a completely different model than what CrimeReads is. So CrimeReads is the only vertical that is thematic.
Got it. So tell us about your job there as associate editor. What do you do as associate editor?
I have the best job. I really, really love working there. It's a constant joy, and that is my job description. I work with writers, freelance writers, as well as published authors. Our website has a unique publishing model, which is we accept freelance pitches and we work with those writers, but also we work with writers who have books coming out. And so it allows them to discuss something about their new book, some idea or a reading list that they used when they put together the book's outline originally, or want to talk about genres or books that inspire them or something like that. So we have those two main types of pieces. One is more of a deep dive structure, and the other is more of it's more couched in the discussion of contemporary and crime fiction and what comes out. I also, in addition to editing and working with these writers, I also write for the site myself. So I am the film critic at LitHub, but this also extends to CrimeReads. So partially my job is is reviewing new movies, but also writing about classics. Everything from, say, the Audrey Hepburn, Peter O'Toole, 60s crime caper, How to Steal a Million, to the 1980s buddy comedy crime classic, Midnight Run with Robert De Niro and Charles Grodin, which is one of my favorite movies. Lots of opportunities to do deep dives on movies that people love but may not have thought about in a while, remind people or introduce to them classic crime movies or books that maybe they've never heard of before, but do vanguard things or play with the genre in interesting ways or are interesting and nostalgic. And that's my favorite part. As much as I absolutely love working with our writers, I love editing them and hearing all of their amazing ideas, it's also extremely fun for me to put together a piece about a movie that I have a unique reading of, or that I really just want to proselytize about.
How is the genre, in your view, how's the genre moved along? I mean, what's the current state? You know, when you think about, just thinking about what you've been talking about, the kind of caper movies, Audrey Hepburn and Peter O'Toole. I mean, in a way, that's indicative of the great progress in mystery fiction over the last, 100 years, from cozy stories and Miss Marple and Ellery Queen to hard-boiled detective to conspiracy theories to... Do you have a sort of a simple view in your head about where things are today and where they might be going in terms of mystery fiction?
That's such a great question. Thank you. One of the first thing I can say right off the top of my head is that we are in a whodunit renaissance. And this extends to movies as well as books. But the popularity of Rian Johnson's Knives Out and Glass Onion films, and the numerous whodunits that came out last year, including the Agatha Christie meta movie See How They Run, I think is really indicative that the golden era crime, the golden age of crime fiction from the 30s, whodunits and locked room mysteries, and appeal for that specific subgenre has not gone away, even though we may have not seen new whodunits come out for a while. The fact that the genre is so malleable and adapts and evolves and can absorb other genres and splinter off into them is one of the most fascinating things about the crime genre. I think right now we are in a period of really exciting true crime reappraisals. Sarah Weinman has been doing this for a long time, and Sarah Weinman's now the crime book critic at the New York Times, but she's also a nonfiction writer, and she has, for a very long time, looked at the history and nuances of true crime and true crime reportage. But I think that kind of investigation into how to responsibly represent or tell the story of a historical crime without exploitation. I think that's extremely popular right now. Writers like Rachel Monroe have been writing about the phenomenon of this sort of dead girl trope and how that's being turned on its head recently. And then you have, John Darnielle and Devil House, a book which just came out last year, which is an extraordinary, very sensitive reappraisal of the exploitative practices of true crime. So I think we're in a period of extraordinary reflection, a reflection that includes looking back to genres that may have fallen out of fashion and bringing them back, like the whodunit, but also reevaluating how to tell crime stories respectfully and appropriately, and to make sure that is instilled going forward. I think a lot of TV shows like Only Murders in the Building, or even Based on a True Story, which was on Peacock, which are both sort of about the exploitative nature of certain elements of true crime. And I think those represent that there's an extremely humanistic impulse in the whole genre going forward.
Yeah, it's fascinating. Yeah, I think, and it's a wonderful summary. And I think you're right. The lovely thing about talking to you is you've got a point of view, but then you've got examples, and I think your examples are, really terrific.
Thank you so much. Oh, another thing that I just thought, we're experiencing a genre that I refer to as the millennial whodunit, which is, it's a bit like Only Murders in the Building, but also The After Party and Search Party, and where there are stories about how in late capitalism, in our current age, when there's a millennial housing crisis and there's a student debt crisis, and women are experiencing legislation that harms them and repeals their control of their bodies, et cetera, et cetera. We have stories about millennials who feel like their lives are being undermined, and their happiness is being taken away by these forces that are greater than they can control, and they stumble on mysteries, and solving a mystery is a way they sort of get their lives in order themselves, or are able to reckon with big things, sort of get their creative juices flowing and find meaning in their lives and fight back against sort of oppressive structures, power structures. And I think it's really interesting how a lot of the shows now, and I wonder if novels will follow suit, but how there's a specific framing of the murder mystery as being really good for someone else, not the dead person, but for really, really good for the detective, because it helps them solve all of the personal problems they're facing.
Well, it's rarely good for the victim, I think.
Yeah, I would say, rarely, very rarely.
But that's such a good point, because the fundamental thing, you talk about mystery fiction, and where we started all of this, you were talking about the detective as a figure, a force for good, of solving problems, protection. Right up there is sort of a fundamental thing about human nature, is feeling in control. And a mystery story, and solving the mystery and putting the pieces together and coming to the answer, that's just a profound thing that delivers a feeling of control to your protagonists.
Yeah, and I think that's an underlying theme of to get back to why we're here, the Sherlock Holmes stories. Mm-hmm. I mean, this is what Sherlock Holmes brought to society in general, was a sense of certainty amid uncertainty, that Victorian notion of, wanting to create order out of chaos. But at the same time, you had Sherlock Holmes standing up as a representative for, in particular, many women who did not have agency, who did not have control over their own fate, over their own money, etc. And in some ways, what we're seeing now, as you just described, Olivia, it's completely cyclical. We're seeing it happen again.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I agree. I also think that the detective is such a unique figure, and has always been since the Victorian era, because the detective is also outside of the law in the traditional sense. There are police detectives, certainly, and I mean the enduring popularity of Law and Order, SVU, and NCIS, and all those things. Remind us that the police detective subgenre is also a genre. But Sherlock Holmes is an amateur detective. He does not directly answer to the police. He often works with them, but he also helps clients on his own. And I think the fact that there's some sort of authority figure who is able to help the little guy, who isn't in the pocket of some institution or who doesn't necessarily represent the government and is therefore able to go easy or to be sympathetic or, to have a more humanistic approach, is very important. I think now we're encountering a lot of stories like Rian Johnson's Poker Face, which is an update of Columbo, sort of, but that takes away the cop element. Like she's solving mysteries, but she's not a narc. And there's a way that she's able to help deliver justice, but also not sort of rat anybody out. And I think the crime genre is allowing people to negotiate with what is appealing about the detective genre without like an over endorsement of the police and the practices of the police on the whole. The detective is able to distribute justice in a way that's unique and that's more moral and is more helpful to society, some of these books seem to say. There's also a fun trend of heist novels now. We have heist novels out too. And the heist is such an interesting genre because like in the 60s and 70s and 80s, there are all these different varieties of heist movies. And there are a couple heists in Sherlock Holmes too. And I'm mostly thinking of like the Red-Headed League and stuff like this. But there are, or would-be heists. But the heist genre is now less about, as it was maybe in the Ocean's 11 era, like a group of slick people making it rich. Heist stories are becoming now more about justice and taking back things that were stolen. And there's a recent book, Grace Lee's Portrait of a Thief, which is about Chinese-American art history students who steal stolen art from museums that belong to other places. And I think it's really interesting how certain genres, which were once hallmarks of like glitzy, glamorous wish fulfillment and examples of big Hollywood productions, are now sort of becoming stories about the underdogs and how people are taking back control over their lives, the powers and forces that have oppressed them, etc. And the best example of this is the new movie How to Blow Up a Pipeline, which is a sort of eco-thriller climate heist movie.
Well, I'm so glad you mentioned that, because when you combine these thoughts of the underdog, the little guy going around the police, these heist films, there is a film in the genre here, and there is a connection here, and bear with me, because I know we've talked previously on this show with Maria Konnikova about con men, and in particular, I saw there's a film you've written about a number of times. It's a personal favorite of mine, and that is The Sting. And when you think about the movie The Sting, it's not just about the heist, it's not just about the caper, but think to the beginning of the film when Luther was killed. This is a story about redemption. It's a story about revenge in some ways, and going outside of the realm of the law, and you're seeing the little con man get away with taking the big con man for a huge ride, a literal ride on the train. And just how this all plays out, and how human nature is consistent, that you're cheering for these guys even though they're criminals.
Yeah, it's really fascinating how these genres have a moral order that's different than a traditional framework of who's in the wrong and who's in the right. That the awesome, very cool team led by Newman and Redford are ultimately doing something that's good, because they're undermining the power of this extremely ruthless mob figure. Essentially, they're undercutting his control of the economic world of Chicago and New York. And I mean, how can you not root for them when they're up against Doyle Lonnegan, Robert Shaw's like extremely cold, very cutthroat, unbelievably ruthless murderer who is in the beginning of the movie attempts to teach someone a lesson in the most horrible way possible. I think it's so interesting how movies like this, and including that film's predecessor, Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kid, which also reworks the bandit Western movie so that those bandits are actually the heroes and not the antagonists. I think it's extremely interesting how these movies are able to manipulate our expectations of justice based on individual character experiences and that kind of subjective perspective. Who you root for can really determine how the entire moral framework of the movie is going to go.
Yeah. Yeah.
I don't know if that last line made sense, but...
No, it did. It did. They would have gotten away with it, too, if it weren't for these meddling kids.
Yeah. Yeah. It's so cool because in the detective novel or the detective story, I mean, the detective is the good guy and the criminals are the bad guys. In the heist, it's completely flipped. And it's so cool when those somehow become the same story, like when the detective is the one who has to pull off the heist somehow. This is the appeal of the show White Collar for me, which I definitely have an irrational adoration of that show. I watch it all the time. I've seen it like 6 times. It's not the greatest show in the world, but it is really fun because it manages to combine those two things, and it's so difficult to do that.
Yeah, and I think this is why, in a few instances, we as readers allow Sherlock Holmes to get away with it. Yes, he's supposed to be for, truth and justice, but it's that accent on justice. If he's breaking the law in a good cause, as Watson pledges to do with him, then we can see the right in it, and we're still cheering him on.
Yeah, I think that's extremely interesting too, because that gets expanded in so many ways. I mean, the show Dexter from, a decade or more ago shows a serial killer who quote unquote kills bad people, so it's okay. That's the moral justification of the show. And I think it's all things like this, case by case, not literally case by case, but but shows that take morality on a case by case basis are extremely interesting, and they do kind of go back to Sherlock Holmes. I mean, Sherlock Holmes is in part a con man. This is one of my chapters in my dissertation, but he relies on tricking people all the time, and he lies to people, and he even sometimes perpetrates crimes, and it's all in the name of justice, but he gets to be all of those figures in one. He gets to be the detective and the administrator of morality and justice, but he also gets to be a scammer in camouflage as an old man or a woman or a priest or, et cetera, and give us the thrill that the criminal exploits give us. But it's salvaged in the end because it's for a good cause.
Well, I think that's a great kind of camp to this discussion, Olivia. You've got your thesis defense coming up in a few months. We wish you the best on that, but what's next for you after that?
Thank you. Well, I am very excited to be continuing at LitHub and CrimeReads. I have after the dissertation's over, I have a lot of movies to catch up on. So there might be a big glut of pieces that come out for me, maybe one a day, I don't know. But but hopefully I will have a book announcement soon. Fingers crossed in that department. I would really like if I can transition from a life staring at my computer writing about Victorian nonfiction to a life staring at my computer writing constantly about Victorian fiction in a different way. So who knows? But that's the plan. Hopefully more writing. Hopefully people haven't gotten sick of me yet, and I can continue to write about things I love and hopefully things other people love too.
That's great. Well, in the meantime, thank you so much for sharing your love of all things crime fiction with us here on I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere.
Thank you so much for having me, Scott and Bird. It's such a pleasure speaking with you.
Over the years, we've talked to so many people who are articulate and thoughtful and who see the fun of mystery fiction and Sherlock Holmes in particular in the Victorian age. But boy, I would put Olivia at the head of the list. And the other thing that really occurs to me about this conversation is the number of really good points and nice points that came up. In fact, in particular, your point about Holmes, and I just loved her characterization of Holmes as sort of the trickster, well, an idea that isn't pursued enough.
I agree. I mean, on all of that. I mean, the answers were thoughtful, and quite frankly, I think we are all the beneficiaries of having Olivia at CrimeReads and at LitHub, overseeing a lot of this stuff. I mean, if you look across the breadth of writing on CrimeReads and the regular publication schedule they have there, it is most impressive. And I think we're only going to see more of that once Olivia is unleashed from her dissertation. So we'll look forward to more pieces from her. Hey, I hear you over there. You must be scratching your head wondering what's new with our friends at MX Publishing. Well, let me tell you, if you don't go to their website often, it is worth a visit, because I can tell you just this summer we've had a number of publications like The Recollections of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Hall, Sherlock Holmes, A Question of Time by Glenn Searfoss, Sherlock Holmes, A Study in Illustrations, Volume 4 by Mike Foy, and Oscar Slater, A Killer Exposed by Brenda Rossini. But coming up, there are at least 5 books that are going to be released in September, as well as, another 6 or 7 in October. Everything from Nessie's Nemesis, Sherlock's Secretary, Book 2 by Chris Chan, Sherlock Holmes, Tales of Darkness by Paul D. Gilbert, Sherlock Holmes and a Tale of Greed by Daniel D. Victor, Sherlock Holmes, The Devil's Disciples by Richard Ryan, A Study in Statecraft by Orlando Pearson, and many, many more. Just get over to mxpublishing.com and check out their new books to see exactly what fits your appetite today. Right, everybody knows what that means. That's right, it's time for Canonical Couplets, where we give you 2 lines of poetry and are asking you to discern with us exactly which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about. Sometimes we know, sometimes we don't, but we expect you to always be at the ready. So here we go. If you were around here the last time, you'll recall that we gave you this clue. To see a genius in his tracks arrested, just whisper Norbury as he requested. Bert, do you know which Sherlock Holmes story we're talking about? Bert? Oh, Bert.
Oh, sorry, I was muting myself, something that people tell me I don't do nearly enough, but in this case, it's inappropriate. This is a case that people have misunderstood greatly over the years. They think it's about a sailing vessel, but it was actually about the theft of a cook's favorite casserole. It's the case Watson called The Glorious Pot.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
Don't call me Shirley.
Oh, boy. The Glorious Pot. No, I'm afraid that is not correct. And we're going to turn to our friend Eric Deckers, as always, because he is usually our saving grace here. He said, I've solved it because this is one of my favorite Sherlock Holmes stories. This is the story Watson called, I'm Not Crying, You're Crying, Shut Up. Except that's not right, because Victorian men shove their emotions safely down into the darkest places of their souls, never to be seen again. So this story was more likely The Yellow Face. Yes, Eric, you have it. That is correct. It is The Yellow Face. And we have... What was our prize the last time around? Something from the vaults, I believe.
Well, if it's the yellow face, it should be lemons. Don't we say lemons?
It was, it was a yellow-backed copy of old BSJ.
Oh,
that's what
perfect.
it was.
Perfect.
Yeah, because we talked about Ben Abramson last time. So we did unearth one of his wonderfully over-designed and published editions of, I guess it was the first 13 editions of the BSJ. We will have one of those to send to someone who will be picked from the spinning prize wheel. Get ready. It's going around, coming to rest on number 32. 32, and it looks like that goes to, why, it's Bob Hamner.
Hooray!
Congratulations, Bob. We will have a copy of that old BSJ coming your way. And now, in this episode, I guess this is one where we will have another piece of Sherlockian treasure from our midst here. I believe, if I rustle around in the vaults here, I have a Sherlock Holmes mug here. It is an oversized mug suitable for one carafe of coffee, it looks like, by the size of the mug. Quite heavy. But we will give that to the person whose name gets picked out of the revolving drum from the spinning prize wheel, who correctly answers this clue. From this important record, it appears that Holmes was pretty good at 60 years. If you know the answer to this episode's canonical couplet, put it in an email addressed to comment@ihearofsherlock.com with canonical couplet in the subject line. If your name is selected at random from all the correct answers, you'll win. Good luck. Oh, boy. I hope somebody gets it this time.
I hope so, too.
Yeah. So, what do we have coming up next in the world of Sherlock Holmes? What's the scuttlebutt on the street, Bert?
The scuttlebutt on the street is, when are they going to be cleaning the pavements? You know, the problem is that with the cutbacks in the local municipalities, I think street cleaning has really fallen. And particularly, you can imagine Sherlock Holmes in one of these communities, he would be stopping sort of every foot and a half and saying, well, there's mud from the south side of the street. There's mud from the north side. I've seen that mud before in Pittsburgh. He would never get where he was going.
Okay, yeah, I get that. I was talking about in the world of Sherlock Holmes, though.
Well, Scuttlebutt on the Street is Peter's latest newsletter, the Scuttlebutt from the Spermaceti Press.
Well, that works too. Yeah.
I don't know why you don't like any of my answers.
I guess I was looking for any specifics, any events you're going to, anything that's coming up in the world of Sherlock Holmes news, things like that.
Oh, Sherlock Holmes. Well, I've gotten an invitation from the Six Napoleons of Baltimore, and I'm hoping to go to my very first meeting of that group on September 11th.
That's great.
And there's going to be a number of informal dinners and gatherings. The Cornish Horrors may very well be meeting the very first Saturday in November. But I don't like to talk about those things because it tells me that summer is rapidly drawing to a close, and I don't like that information.
Well, then you're not going to like this either. Also drawing rapidly to a close, unfortunately, was Simpsons in the Strand.
Oh,
I don't know if you heard about that, but the restaurant struggled for some time, certainly during the pandemic, and wasn't able to make a comeback. And of course, if you're familiar with the Sherlock Holmes stories, Holmes recommended something a little nutritious at Simpson's would not be out of place at the conclusion of The Dying Detective, I believe. And it was originally established over 150 years ago.
Yes, as a chess divan.
Yeah, as a divan Chess players, and they were noted for their presentation of roast beef in the main dining room there, from under the silver domes, carved right at your table. But they've closed, and they've auctioned off all of their belongings as well.
Oh, I didn't know that. That is very sad. Every time, in fact, I have here on my desk a sort of a bookmark, a black menu card from Simpsons, and it was right near the Savoy. I love going to Simpsons. That's very sad.
Yeah, but we'll have a write-up about that in some future days on the I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere website. So check that out. Make sure you're subscribed to us there on the website at ihearofsherlock.com, and we will let you know more about that as we figure it out.
I think I'll have to go into New York and visit Chris Cella's just to cheer up.
Well, good luck finding that.
Oh, wait a minute. Well, all right. I'm going to go to the Murray Hill Hotel then for a cocktail.
Oh, well, in the meantime, this is Scott Monty from yesteryear.
And this is the perpetually lost Burt Wolder.
And together, we say... The game's afoot.
Afoot.
The game's afoot.
You know, I'm afraid that in the pleasure of this conversation, I'm neglecting business of importance, which awaits me elsewhere.
Thank you for listening. Please be sure to join us again for the next episode of I Hear of Sherlock Everywhere, the first podcast dedicated to Sherlock Holmes.
Goodbye, and good luck, and believe me to be, my dear fellow, very sincerely yours, Sherlock Holmes.